Alaric's public face was a masterpiece of feigned concern. "It's nothing, my love," he chuckled, his voice a warm balm for the watching nobles. "Just an accident. We all have them." He dabbed at the spill with his napkin, the perfect, doting fiancé. But under the table his hand was a vice. His fingers clamped around her arm, the grip so tight she felt the bones grind. His manicured nails dug into her skin, breaking the surface, a brutal punishment hidden from view. A choked gasp caught in her throat. He leaned in, his breath a cold poison against her ear. "You will pay for this humiliation later, you useless thing," he whispered, the words a promise of the agony to come. The charm in his voice was gone, replaced by the familiar, chilling venom she knew so well. He leaned in, his breath a cold poison against her ear. "You will pay for this humiliation later, you useless thing," he whispered, the words a promise of the agony to come. The charm in his voice was gone, replaced by the familiar, chilling venom she knew so well. Ice flooded her veins. She turned pale, shrinking into her chair, making herself smaller, less visible. This was her reality, a public stage of adoration and a private hell of his making. She didn't dare breathe, didn't dare move, knowing any reaction would only make it worse. Surrounded by the most powerful people in the kingdom, Elara was completely alone. Trapped in a cage of silk and fear, she could only stare at the spreading stain on the tablecloth, a perfect symbol of how she had, once again, ruined everything. A hush fell over the grand hall, so sudden and complete it was like a physical blow. The music died, the laughter choked. Every head turned toward the high table, where a shadow had risen. King Kale stood to his full, terrifying height, his presence sucking the very air from the room. His liquid gold eyes, ancient and predatory, swept across the nobles, dismissing them all until they landed on one person, on her. He moved, not with the measured pace of a monarch, but with the silent, fluid grace of a hunter closing in. The sea of silk and jewels parted before him, nobles scrambling to get out of his path. His gaze never left Elara, a physical pressure that rooted her to her seat, her heart hammering against her ribs. Beside her, she felt Duke Alaric stiffen, his hand on her arm tightening in possessive anger. The king stopped at their table, his sheer size casting both of them in his shadow. He didn't so much as glance at the duke, a deliberate, soul-crushing insult. His entire world, his entire focus, narrowed to Elara. The scent of ozone, cedar, and raw power washed over her, a dizzying contrast to Alaric's cloying, perfumed cruelty. He spoke, and his voice was not the thunderous roar the court expected. It was a low, resonant rumble, meant only for her, yet it carried across the silent hall. "My lady, you seem unwell." His eyes flickered to the hand gripping her arm. "I require your presence. Your family's expertise with ancient texts is needed to finalize the treaty. Immediately." It was a command wrapped in the thinnest veil of courtesy, a political masterstroke. To refuse would be to admit the treaty was flawed, or that he, Duke Thorn, had something to hide. Alaric's face went from smug ownership to pale fury. He was trapped, outmaneuvered in a game he didn't even know he was playing. His fingers loosened on her arm, leaving angry red marks behind. King Kale extended a large, scarred hand. It was not a question. It was a statement. "You are coming with me." Elara stared at it, then up at his impossibly intense eyes. For the first time in years, she saw something other than a cage. She saw an escape. Trembling, she placed her small hand in his, and his fingers closed around hers, a warm, protective fortress. He turned, pulling her gently to her feet, and led her away from the table, his body a living shield between her and the monster she was leaving behind. The walk to the king's wing was a blur of polished stone and silent, armored guards. He never let go of her hand, his thumb stroking gently over her knuckles in a gesture so comforting it made her want to weep. He didn't lead her to a cold guest room, but to his private royal suite. The door opened not to a gilded cage, but to a sanctuary. It was vast, dominated by a hearth where a fire crackled, casting a warm golden light over dark woods and rich, worn leather. The air smelled of cedar and old books, a scent of quiet strength. It wasn't a room meant to impress. It was a room meant to be lived in. A home. The sheer comfort of it was a physical shock after the sterile perfection of Alaric's world. "Healers," Cale commanded softly. Two women entered, their eyes kind. They didn't ask questions. They simply guided her to a plush armchair by the fire and gently pushed up her sleeve. The sight of the angry, finger-shaped bruises made Cale's jaw clench, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He turned away, a low growl rumbling in his chest, a sound of contained fury not directed at her, but for her. The healers worked with practiced gentleness, applying a cool, soothing balm to her skin. It was the first time in years a touch hadn't been a prelude to pain. When they were finished, a servant brought a tray with a simple bowl of rich stew and fresh bread. Cale placed it on a small table beside her. "Eat," he said, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a command. It was a quiet plea for her to care for herself. Later, unable to rest, she wandered into the adjoining library. It was a cathedral of knowledge, shelves stretching into the shadows. Two colossal shapes detached themselves from the darkness, his dire wolves, Fenrir and Skoll. She froze, expecting teeth, but they approached slowly, their massive heads bowed. The black wolf, Skoll, nudged her hand, while the silver, Fenrir, laid his head in her lap with a soft whine. Cale stood in the doorway, watching, his golden eyes filled with a strange reverence. "They have never done that with anyone but me," he said, his voice laced with wonder. He saw not a broken thing, but a woman whose gentle spirit could tame the wildest of beasts. He gestured to a large table where maps and scrolls were spread out. "The treaty," he said. "Alaric's house insisted on a final clause. My advisors see no issue, but my gut tells me it's poison." He wasn't testing her. He was asking for her help. Trembling, she scanned the document. Her mind, long suppressed and starved for a challenge, latched onto the intricate wording. It was a masterpiece of deception, a loophole hidden in plain sight that would grant House Thorn control over critical trade routes under the guise of treaty enforcement. "Here," she whispered, her finger tracing the line of text. "It gives them the power to levy security tariffs at their discretion. They could bankrupt the Northern Territories within a year." He looked from the scroll to her face, his expression one of pure, unadulterated admiration. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. He saw her, not the doll, not the victim, but the strategist. "Your insight is sharper than any blade," he murmured, the words hitting her with more force than any physical touch. It was a validation she had never known, a spark of warmth that bloomed in her chest. That night, he led her to a separate bedchamber within the suite, the sheets turned down, the room warm and safe. He stopped at the door, his large frame blocking the exit, yet she felt no fear. "You are safe here, Alara," he said, his voice raw. "No one will ever harm you again. I swear it." He then closed the door, leaving her inside, and she heard the heavy scrape of a chair being dragged across the stone floor outside. He was standing guard, a king, acting as her sentinel. The silence in the library was thick with unspoken words. Cale stared at her, his golden eyes burning with an intensity that had nothing to do with rage and everything to do with reverence. He took the scroll from her trembling fingers, his touch lingering for a fraction of a second too long. "They almost started a war for greed," he rumbled, his voice a low vibration. "And you stopped it with a single glance. My entire council missed this." Alara instinctively flinched, expecting the praise to be a prelude to a demand, but none came. I just saw the pattern," she whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. Alaric always hides his daggers in pretty words. It was the first time she had spoken his name with anything but fear. "Then your eyes see more truth than most," Cale stated, his gaze unwavering. He gestured to another map spread across the table, one detailing the northern farmlands. "My people there are struggling. The harvests are poor, the morale is low. My generals advise a show of force, to tax the merchants more to fund relief efforts. What do you see?" She hesitated, then stepped closer, her fear slowly being replaced by a burgeoning confidence. She studied the map not as a ruler, but as someone who had spent her life observing the overlooked. "Force will only breed resentment," she said, her voice gaining strength. "They don't need a fist. They need a reason to hope. Send seeds, not soldiers. Host a harvest festival in the king's name. Show them their sovereign shares in their prosperity, not just their poverty." Cale was utterly still. He had spent weeks debating this with his advisors, and she had solved the core of the problem in 30 seconds. He saw the queen in her then, not just the beautiful, wounded woman he had rescued. Her empathy wasn't a weakness. It was a strategic weapon. "You speak with the wisdom of a ruler who has long carried her people's hearts," he said, his voice soft with awe. The compliment landed, not as a polite flattery, but as a profound truth that settled deep in her bones. For the first time, she felt seen. He took a step closer, breaking the safe distance between them. The air crackled with a new kind of tension, one that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with a magnetic pull. "Alaric tried to silence your mind," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips. "He was a fool. It is the most beautiful thing about you." Her breath hitched. The raw admiration in his eyes was more intoxicating than any wine. He wasn't just protecting her body, he was cherishing her spirit. "No one has ever," she started but couldn't finish, overwhelmed. "Then let me be the first," he finished for her, his voice a possessive, gentle growl. He reached out, not to grab, but to gently tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His calloused fingers brushed against her cheek, sending a jolt of warmth through her entire being. In that moment, she wasn't a rescued damsel or a political pawn. She was Alara, and in the Shadow King's eyes, she saw not a cage, but a throne waiting for her. He wasn't just offering her safety. He was offering her a crown. A fragile peace had settled over Alara. For 2 days, she had known only safety. The library had become her haven, the scent of old paper and cedar, a balm to her frayed nerves. She was tracing the faded lettering on an ancient scroll when the sound of a commotion in the outer hall reached her. A sharp, angry voice that sliced through the quiet. A voice she knew like the back of her own bruised hand. Her blood ran cold. The scroll slipped from her fingers. It was him. Alaric. Here. A frantic guard appeared in the doorway, his face pale. "My lady, Duke Thorn demands an audience. The king is in council, and the Duke—" He forced his way past the sentries. The words confirmed her worst fear. The cage she had just escaped was trying to drag her back. He appeared in the hallway behind the guard, shoving the man aside as if he were a piece of furniture. Alaric's handsome face was twisted into a mask of possessive rage. His eyes, once feigning affection, now burned with cold fury as they locked onto her. The sanctuary was breached. The monster was inside. "There you are," he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. He took a predatory step forward, ignoring the trembling guard. "Did you really think you could hide from me? That a beast like Kale would want something so used? So broken?" Each word was a poisoned dart, aimed at the fragile confidence she had just begun to build. All the old terror came rushing back, a suffocating tide. Her breath caught in her throat, her body instinctively shrinking, trying to make itself a smaller target. His words echoed in her mind, reinforcing every cruel lie he had ever whispered to her in the dark. She was worthless. She was damaged. The king was just playing a game. He closed the distance between them, his shadow falling over her. He reached for her arm, his fingers curling into a familiar, painful grip. "He's using you for the treaty, you little fool. Once he's done, he'll discard you. But I will always be there to take you back. You belong to me." His touch was like fire and ice, reigniting the memory of every blow, every whispered threat. She flinched, a choked sob escaping her lips. But before his fingers could tighten, a new shadow fell over them both. Larger, darker, and radiating a silence more terrifying than any scream. A low, guttural growl vibrated through the stone floor, a sound of pure, possessive fury that promised not just pain, but annihilation. Kale's presence was not a sound, but a pressure drop that sucked the air from the room. He moved with the lethal calm of a stalking wolf, his golden eyes locked on Alaric's hand, clutching Alara's arm. "Release her," Kale commanded. The voice wasn't a shout. It was a low, guttural promise of violence that vibrated through the stone floor. Alaric, for all his bluster, went rigid with a primal fear. His fingers sprang open as if he'd touched a hot coal. Kale stepped between them, a living shield of muscle and shadow, placing Alara behind him without ever taking his eyes off the Duke. "You have a claim to make, Duke Thorn." Kale's voice was dangerously soft. "Then you will make it before the kingdom, not in the shadows where you thrive." Before Alaric could form a response, royal guards flanked him. He was not dragged, but forced into a procession to the grand hall, where the entire court was now assembled, buzzing with tension. Standing before them all, Alaric's arrogance returned. He pointed a shaking finger. "This beast has stolen my betrothed. He conspires to dishonor my house and seize her lands. I demand justice." The hall filled with murmurs of shock and scandal. Kale ignored every one of them. His world narrowed to the woman at his side. He turned to her, his expression softening, his voice carrying across the silent chamber, yet feeling as intimate as a whisper. "Ilara, look at me. Did he hurt you?" It was the only question that mattered. The entire kingdom held its breath. She met Kale's gaze, drawing strength from his unwavering belief in her. Then she turned her eyes, cold and clear, upon her tormentor. "Yes," she said, her voice not trembling, but ringing with the clarity of a striking bell. That single word shattered Alaric's world. With a steady, deliberate movement, Ilara pushed up the fine silk sleeve of her gown. The ugly tapestry of purple and yellow bruises covering her arm was a brutal, undeniable truth. A collective gasp of horror rippled through the nobility. Kale's jaw was granite, but his voice remained a blade. "You hide your treason in legal clauses," he snarled, exposing the treaty's deception for all to hear. "And you hide your pathetic weakness on the skin of a woman. You are not a nobleman. You are a parasite." With a final, damning motion, Kale tore the Thorn family seal from the treaty documents, rendering them void. "Your betrothal is broken. Your titles are stripped. Your house is ruined." He then turned, pulling Ilara flush against his hard body, his arm wrapping around her waist like a possessive claim. His voice boomed, a king's roar of absolute ownership that left no room for doubt. "She does not belong to you. She belongs to this throne. She is mine. She is your queen." He sealed the vow with a kiss, not of gentle comfort, but of fierce public branding. And Ilara met it, not with fear, but with a fire of her own, claiming her future as he claimed her. 1 year later, the grand hall was unrecognizable, gone were the cold, calculating nobles of the old court, replaced by a kingdom celebrating a true union. Ilara stood beside Kale, not as a porcelain doll, but as a sovereign in her own right. He placed the queen's crown upon her head himself, his large hands impossibly gentle. The crown was not a cage, but a testament to her strength. As the court roared its approval, he leaned in, his whisper for her alone. "My queen, my mate, my home." Their rule became a legend. In the council chamber, where she once would have been invisible, Ilara's voice was now the most respected. She spoke of diplomacy over dominance, of compassion over coercion. Kale sat beside her, not as a king indulging a whim, but as a partner who valued her insight above all others. He would watch her, his golden eyes filled with a fierce pride, as she dismantled centuries-old disputes with a quiet wisdom that his general's swords never could. The nights were her sanctuary. The fear of the dark, once a suffocating blanket of terror, was now a time of peace. She would often find Kale in the library, his massive form curled in an armchair by the fire with Fenrir and Skoll at his feet. He would look up as she entered, and the ancient, fearsome Shadow King would become just a man, his heart bare for her to see. He would pull her into his lap, wrapping his arms around her, his steady heartbeat a lullaby that chased away the last of her ghosts. Soon, a new joy echoed through the castle halls. The kingdom's future was secured, not by a treaty, but by a life. Ilara was with child, carrying the heir to the Lycan throne. Kale's possessiveness softened into a reverence so profound it was breathtaking. He treated her as if she were made of spun moonlight, his hand constantly resting on her stomach, a silent guardian over both his queen and their unborn pup. The protector had found his ultimate purpose. Under their joint reign, the kingdom flourished. The northern territories, once on the brink of rebellion, were now the most prosperous, their granaries overflowing thanks to the queen's harvest festivals. Hope, not fear, became the currency of the realm. Ilara's empathy, once a secret weakness she was taught to hide, had become the foundation of an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity. And what of Duke Alaric Thorne? His fall was as spectacular as it was absolute. Stripped of his titles, his lands confiscated, and his name erased from the noble registries, he was cast out. Without his power and wealth, his handsome charm curdled into a pathetic, whining desperation that no one found appealing. He was last seen in the grimy back alleys of the capital, a gaunt shadow in rags, begging for scraps. His family, House Thorne, who had stood by and watched his cruelty with silent approval, shared his fate. Their vast fortune was seized to repay the territories they had schemed to exploit. Their political alliances evaporated overnight, their name becoming a synonym for treachery and disgrace. They who had once looked down on everyone now found no one would even meet their gaze. The world had a brutal yet perfect sense of balance. The man who saw women as objects to be broken and discarded now owned nothing but the filthy clothes on his back, haunted by the memory of the queen he had almost possessed. The trash the Duke had tried to throw away was, in fact, the treasure the Lycan King had spent 800 years waiting to find.